Welcome back, everybody, and thank you for listening in to the fourth wave in therapy. I'm very excited today to actually be joined by a fellow Aussie. I'm going to introduce you now to Dr. Emma-Leigh Senyard. Now, Emma-Leigh is an AHPRA registered, so same as myself, clinical psychologist. She's also a registered supervisor, board approved. She has a PhD herself, and she's passionate about bringing mental health into the spotlight and supporting, in particular now in private practice, teenagers. So again, close to my heart because of all my work in eating disorders, adolescents and adults, but very much about nervous system regulation and not only psychological well-being, but different kind of evidence-based modalities that support that. Of course, EFT tapping is included in that, but internal family systems, meditation, a range of other kind of processes. So I'm really excited to kind of talk today with you, Emma-Leigh, about the intersect, I guess, between psychology and spirituality, mental health, psychological well-being. Thank you and welcome to the fourth wave.
Thanks for having me, Peter.
So
excited to be here.
And I just want to start with you, and we talked about this off air, your journey. You are a registered clinical psychologist, but also a board approved supervisor. So you are working in a mainstream capacity in those kind of roles. But at the same time, you've had your own journey here, haven't you? And your own, kind of progress or process, to wellbeing. Do you want to talk a little bit about, what I know you've shared with me?
Yeah, sure. So up until end of 2021, I was very much working with children, adolescents, families, parenting, mainly in the autism, ADHD, anxiety space, also working in academia as well. And then I had my first daughter at the end of 2021. 7 weeks after that, I unfortunately developed some inflammation in my body. So that was quite full on. That resulted, so the inflammation was in my heart, was in my stomach, was kind of, to be honest, in all different parts of my body. Quite traumatic with the little one at the time. But for that next 12 months or so, my health was really kind of a bit all over the shop. It wasn't really, I wasn't textbook. I wasn't black and white to all the specialists that I was seeing. And to be honest, if I was that medical professional as well, I'd be like, oh, I don't know what I'm dealing with here. So there was some medical gaslighting initially. There was some, I think it was 7 months until I was actually diagnosed with initially a heart condition at the time. Because at the time I was still continuing to work with clients. I was still continuing to work in academia. I didn't really know what was going on. Some days I felt like I was totally fine, and I was like, oh, maybe this is just kind of like a flu or a cold, and maybe it's just going to go away. And that's kind of what I was expecting. So I was like, oh, I feel fine today. It's just going to go away tomorrow. That wasn't the case, unfortunately. So initially there was really something medically going on. When I got the diagnosis, unfortunately, it kind of, and whether or not we can speak about this more, but whether or not I kind of got in my head a little bit, and that just kind of made things worse or perpetuated it and kind of worsened where I was at. That then resulted in a few different hospitalizations for a week at a time and so on. Me exploring lots of different other alternative health methods to heal at that time, because the medical professionals were like, I don't really know, you're just going to have to kind of live with this forever. And at the time I said, I'm quite stubborn. So I said, no, I'm not going to live with it like this forever. I'm young, I'm a mum. I've just, my daughter was only, around about 1 at that time when I was having the first lot of hospitalizations. I'm not living like this. So I, with my research hat on, I started researching everything, and, I was doing oxygen therapy and hydrogen therapy and so on. Anyway, in a few months' time after that, a lot of these inflammation and these symptoms in my body had actually resolved. I wasn't showing inflammation on my blood tests anymore. However, my body still continued to produce symptoms every now and then. And again, my medical team was going, oh, what's going on? Well, we don't know. So at that time, someone handed me, initially, it was a Joe Dispenza book. You Are the Placebo. And I said, oh, okay, I don't know. I'm kind of, I'm open to this. I was open to everything at that stage. So I started reading it, and Joe talks very scientifically So that was helpful with my science brain. So I started reading and I started doing his meditations. And for those who don't know, a lot of Joe's meditations is visualizing yourself as healed, a lot of that mental imagery. And then also while you're visualizing, experiencing or feeling the emotion of what it feels like to be in that version that you want of you. So at that time, I was so, after this was like 16 months in, at this stage, I'm going, I've done everything. What's going on? And at this stage, I was so disbelieving that I would get back to where I was, that in those meditations, I would literally be crying because I'm like, I just couldn't believe that I would be able to get back to that stage. So I was processing a lot of emotions. But very quickly, I started, the first thing in my brain that sort of shift that I noticed, both physically and psychologically, was just an improvement in the way that I guess my mindset was initially the first thing. I started to feel hope, which we know in the research, hope is a massive protective factor, both for physical and psychological conditions. So I started to feel like, okay, maybe I can improve. Maybe I can get somewhere with this. Started to feel hope. And then I started to, my body started to feel lighter, I guess. I started to experience slowly less and less symptoms. And so I was continuing to do these meditations daily, sometimes for an hour or more a day, for maybe 10 months or so. Was seeing improvements. But then it wasn't, there would be times where there would be certain triggers like food, even smells, overstimulation of environments, which would then bring about symptoms in my body. And some of those symptoms were quite scary symptoms like PVCs, or premature ventricular contractions. In other words, skipped heartbeats, a racing heartbeat, kind of feelings of itchiness, feelings of my throat closing, lots of symptoms that were quite, oh my God, am I dying sort of experiences. Yeah. And then it sounds a bit woo-woo, but then one night we were camping and, we know that nature and forest bathing actually has fantastic, evidence-based, positive effects on the body. But being in nature, I thought, people have mentioned these brain retraining programs to me. And initially my ego kind of got in there a little bit saying, these brain retraining programs, like these aren't psychologists or psychiatrists or doctors running these programs. How could it possibly help me? And what are they talking about? But you know what? I surrendered and I said, maybe this will help, maybe it won't. Let's give it a go. So I started doing some online brain retraining programs, and they were really talking about the polyvagal system, which there's some scientific debate around. Like there's definitely parts of the polyvagal theory there is plenty of support for that, like the autonomic nervous system, which we can talk about. And then there's some other parts that are more debated, like the ventral vagal system of the polyvagal theory. Anyway, and it was also talking about that, and it was also talking about the vagus nerve. And look, to be honest, I didn't know a lot about the vagus nerve, and the research is probably it is still evolving in that area. But I started to come across vagal toning exercises. And then I started to kind of put two and two together, and I'm kind of realizing, okay, this throat tightening that I'm having, these symptoms that I'm having in my heart, these stomach issues that I'm having, maybe it is related to the vagus nerve because it's not medically explained anymore. And the vagus nerve runs through all of those areas. So I'm going, oh, okay, maybe this is what's going on. So very quickly then, and this was quite some time later, 2-3 years after my initial presentation of symptoms, very quickly after doing these vagal tone exercises in terms of humming, breathing, deep breathing, singing, and even doing some inner child play, joy-based things like laughter yoga, which always sounded ridiculous when we would practice for those who have been forced to do that in honours or undergraduate psychology, where laughter is contagious and you're laughing together. I was doing that on a daily basis. There's a free online group by a professor in India that runs that. So I was doing that. And also just doing like online dance parties and just really stop being so serious. That's what I was doing. And so all of these things, within probably 6 weeks, I was really starting to feel myself again. I've spoken a lot there, Peter.
No, this is fantastic. I know anyone listening is probably writing notes, and we'll absolutely put in the show notes that link to the online laughter that you were talking about. No, keep going, please, keep going.
Sure. So then what was, I guess, a real test for me was in January last year. So I was starting to feel really good. And then in January last year, my husband and I said, are we ready to have another baby? My daughter was now like 3. So this was a real test of that mind-body connection of, do I trust my body? Because I would have never have said that I was an anxious person. But after the 3rd hospitalization that I experienced with these conditions, where I was hospitalized for a week at the time, I was really unwell, I started to have a lot of doubts in my body and not trust my body anymore. And so, and started to develop PTSD type symptoms eventually. It was going to happen to me. So I said, you know what? Like, I'm just going to surrender to that. It felt like the right thing to do. I didn't want my daughter, for me personally, just to grow up as an only child for me. That's not what I had in my head as my visualization. So we were successful, and last year I spent my year predominantly being pregnant. And so that the first trimester was a real kind of me managing my mentally. I was having still some physical symptoms as well, but a real shift in my mindset around, can I trust my body through this, and my mind-body connection, and really strengthen my relationship with my body as well. And so I had a really largely uneventful pregnancy, and a really good, a good birth, although it ended up in emergency C-section. And so my daughter is now 5.5 months, and she's perfect. We all say that, but she is as well. So, but within the few months after that, my body, I think, just an emergency C-section, I wasn't prepared for it. Had 15 minutes to prepare. I had been, and we can talk about this more, but I had been kind of using Joe's techniques around visualization, around what I wanted to achieve, and hypnobirthing as well, around what I envisioned my birth to look like with my second daughter. And it wasn't what I wanted it to be, unfortunately. But I think I didn't walk out of that experience with trauma, birth trauma, or anything like that. I think all the work that I had done before that around imagery, around nervous system work, around helping my body really be in that parasympathetic state as much as it can be, really set me up for a really good birth, albeit an emergency in the end. And then after my birth, my postpartum has been good, but also my body's thrown out symptoms since then. And and of course there's hormones, and there's the hormones on the vagus nerve and things like that. When your vagus nerve is more sensitive, it's may react in certain ways. But I've been working with my body. I've changed the language, as I was saying before, rather than being, as I was a few years ago, like angry and saying things like, the stupid body, like, why is this happening? And why aren't you listening? And why aren't you just healing? I've changed it in terms of, what is my body trying to tell me in this situation? Am I listening to my body? Is my body just trying to protect me? Is my body just on high alert because of what has happened in the last 4 years or so? And now we just had an emergency C-section, and it's going, oh, what's happening? And so my nervous system skills have come back on board with that. My vagus nerve work has come back on board with that, having to do more of that. But I get back to my baseline much quicker with that. Also using tapping as well, energy approaches. It's been a great alchemy, I guess, as I would say, in terms of my relationship with my body.
Yeah, and what an amazing story. Not only is there so much for us to unpack in there, But yeah, you just sort of hit the nail on the head, I guess. The alchemy of, and I don't know whether you'd put your finger on any one of those approaches, or it was the combination of all of
Right,
them coming together, and maybe the meditation calmed things down to a level, and then the vagus nerve information came in, and then you found those strategies, and then the inner child, and wrapped around all of that might have been tapping and a few other things. I mean, if you look back, 2021, you said it started. Obviously, we'd come out of a worldwide pandemic at that point as well. So there'd been sort of stress
right,
anyway in the world. If you kind of look back and sort of think, wow, the last 4 to 5 years has sort of been a very different journey as far as even being a psychologist with what you've done for yourself, do you kind of look back and kind of think, why was I never taught this stuff earlier? Like, do you ever have those moments? This is what I would think. I'd be like,
right.
why didn't I learn this earlier? And maybe you did, but it got put aside. Like, do you reflect back now and kind of think, wow,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's tricky. Like I was working in the Masters of Clinical Psychology and the Masters of Professional Psychology program for a few years. And we do speak about the autonomic nervous system, but we don't really speak too much about the vagus nerve, about emerging approaches such as the polyvagal theory, even emerging approaches like IFS, which was also a part of my journey, EMDR. Like we are getting better at that, but the mind-body connection, I
Mm,
think both on both sides, both within the medical profession, like in terms of I mean, we are medical, but in terms of general practitioners or medical specialists versus psychology and psychiatry, there's not a great overlap between the two. That mind body connection is not very good in my experience, and so I really would hope to see that evolve in the future.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. Anyone listening in that knows my classes knows that we teach it all. So we're trying to get there one class at a time. Um, and I guess as a psychologist, because throughout, both these pregnancies, but also listening into your body, what your body's message was for you, how has that impacted your own work in the world now? Like you're
Oh.
obviously seeing clients in private practice. Obviously, we don't always disclose our own journeys to clients, but has that made a difference for you? Like, are you different as a psychologist now, having been through that?
I'm 100%. I'm different as a person, as a mum, as a psychologist, as everything. Through it all, similar to what we would do in trauma-focused CBT and even EMDR, is I had to find meaning as well through these experiences, because there were times when I was hospitalized and when I was at my worst where my cardiologist, I asked for reassurance, and my cardiologist couldn't give me reassurance that I wouldn't just, I know it sounds awful, but I wouldn't just, you know, go the next day. And that was really difficult with a really young child.
Mm.
Um, it was very traumatic and difficult for other people to understand, of course, what was going on. So I had to find meaning, and for me, that looked. I explored spirituality and different ways of viewing life, and also then looking at my values in life and realigning myself better, I guess, with my values, or living in line more with what my values were in life. And prior to this happening, as much I really see this whole experience as there's a lot of silver linings in it for me. And prior to this, all of this experience, I will admit that I was, biting off more than I can chew, that I was doing far too many things. And unfortunately, I think in psychology, I'm mindful of saying this, but I think in psychology, it is that bottleneck approach. It is really competitive. We are expected to perform at a really high level, and in some degrees, work an awful lot to achieve that success, or achieve, what we need to get into the next degree, to get the dream job or what have you. So that, coupled with, I think, just the general society of pandemic, and us these days needing, there's FOMO, there's needing to survive, just financially and just so many things. And then my own experience of some childhood trauma, just so many things I think set me up for that experience of being vulnerable. But then going through that values, and finding meaning and spirituality and what that meant, what the whole experience meant for me, shifted then what I did with clients clinically and what I was passionate about. And as much as I really enjoyed working with, and I still do work with kids and families and in autism and ADHD, I've shifted more into, I guess, this fourth wave modalities in terms of EMDR, in terms of tapping and other energy psychology and meditation and just the nervous system and getting into that parasympathetic state more often, because I think so many people are not aware that they're, and I certainly wasn't, aware that they're in sympathetic drive or fight or flight all the time.
Yeah, it's a normal baseline. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So true. And it's interesting, and I wonder if it's happened to you, because it certainly happened to me over the years, just when I was actively seeing clients. It's like whatever you were doing or embracing, they were the clients that walked through the door as well, that, as different phases of my own personal growth journey changed. So would my clients walking through the door, I don't know if that's sort of been reflected too. I was having existential conversations with 14-year-olds, about their eating disorder, and yeah, it was so, and a wise old mentor kind of pointed that out to me as well once in supervision, kind of went, yes, it's just a reflection of where you're at. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've noticed that as well, that, where you're at in your journey, yeah, that's maybe reflected in the private practice work.
Yeah, totally. I think as I've shifted as a person, I attract different people, I guess, that are more aligned with my now my approach. But of course, like I always look at a client and look at what level 1 evidence exists for working with the presenting symptoms. But sometimes, if it's clinically informed, that is maybe not going to answer or help in its totality, then let's look at some of these emerging therapies that do have evidence, but are not that level 1 just yet. Yeah. And so that's been an involvement. Like I said, I really like IFS and EMDR and so on, but it's not because of where it sits, particularly IFS. Because of where it sits in terms of the levels of evidence, it's not something that I will immediately say, right, we're going to do IFS. Yeah. I'll look at a formulation. I'll look at what the level one is, and I'll have a conversation, level 1 evidence is, and I'll have a conversation with the client and say, okay, these are our options. This is what I'm formulating. This is what a level 1 is. What do you think? Or this is our other options, and what do you think? And discussions around what they can expect the outcomes to be.
Yeah. Potentially. IFS, internal family systems, everyone, if you're just wondering that acronym. And I mean, Emma-Leigh, when you have those conversations now with clients and you present those different options, and we like that co-design, co-collaboration kind of approach, I know just generally in the field. I mean, are clients, where are they drifting to? Like, what is their answer when you offer these things and kind of go, well, here's this, and that could be the level 1, that's the evidence base, that's, obviously got loads and loads of research, that's why we have them. Here's some other ones emerging. What do clients choose?
Sure, and I do think it depends on, of course, on the client, but what I was seeing, just to digress a little bit, what I was seeing at the same time I was kind of going through my journey, or just before, I was seeing some clients that were going through similar journeys to what I was, but similar or different symptoms of what was happening. And, they were going down the medical route, and they were getting, all of these different tests and endoscopies, colonoscopies, and all these different tests, and that just they was kind of getting a dead end, roadblocks and so on. There was no answers for them, not medically explained. And so for me as well, that gave me an opportunity to, when I was going through my own journey, going, oh, okay, maybe this is what's the missing piece of the puzzle for them as well. So that has then since allowed me to, I guess, be more holistic in my approach of looking at, okay, not just the mind, as we're very much trained about in psychology, but more about the embodiment, the body connection, and so on. So I think, it depends. I definitely have clients that are much more that are open-minded, especially when I present the potential and what research actually exists here and now. There is, I guess, there is online a bit of a buzz around IFS and EMDR. I mean, EMDR has substantial evidence now, even though we don't quite know the exact mechanism for how it works. That it's a bit of a buzzword, I guess, with IFS online, and also the vagus nerve and nervous system and so on. But I think that, we'll get there in terms of the research and where it's coming slowly.
Absolutely, and that's why we do what we do, because things change, things do evolve, and you touched on obviously the title too, but also this whole fourth wave kind of approach. I mean, if you sit back, you reflect, you're very trained in the third wave approaches. Anyone listening in might be familiar, with our, behavioral approaches, but also our cognitive behavioral approaches. Mindfulness might be attached in there, even acceptance and commitment therapy, all of which have huge amounts of research to show how they work, and they absolutely indeed work. But if we think about the next phase, perhaps in our world, our shared kind of, discipline area here, I mean, do you use the word hope when you were obviously doing the Joe Dispenza meditations? I did want to ask you, were you doing them just purely from his book, or were you actually listening to his voice guiding you?
Right. So I generally like to listen. So you can purchase his meditations on his website. But I just want to say with a caveat, most people, when they start listening to Joe's voice, I kind of say, oh, this is a bit, abrupt. Like his voice is very strong. But there is like some research around why he speaks the way he does, and to slow those brain waves and so on. So
Yep. Great caveat. We've had Joe out here a couple of times, so we do know why there is a method and a reason for the tone and the voice. So absolutely. That was me diverting. Sorry about that. Whole fourth wave and the hope, you mentioned hope, like do you look at the landscape of your own clients and your own journey and kind of hold hope that perhaps this fourth wave will embrace in the psychological well-being and kind of counseling space these elements of, it could be spirituality, it could be more autonomic nervous system regulation, vagus nerve included. Is that something that you're kind of, offering clients, but foreseeing too that this is a changing landscape? Are you noticing that?
Yes, I've spoken with and connected with several clinicians and researchers and other clinical psychologists and psychologists who are very interested and researching these projects or these areas. And so I think we'll start to see more and more of that, hopefully. I think, like, for example, with CBT, it is very, that's the first thing that we're teaching, right, in programs, and every psychologist is well versed in CBT. But for me, on my own personal journey, like experiencing the medical PTSD and so on that I was experiencing, it just wasn't touching the surface. Like, it just wasn't, for me personally, helping, because in that instance, like, there was if we're going to look at, one of the things that we do in CBT is look at whether it's rational thought and whether we can challenge it. For me, it was a rational thought that something adverse could happen and I could end up back in hospital again. I then looked at acceptance commitment therapy. Okay, can I just accept this? I can, but it's very scary, So neither of those were kind of really, really helping me. And so that's why I guess I'm really excited and passionate about, okay, well, when they aren't working, and absolutely they do work for people, some people, but they don't work for everyone, what can we then explore that's going to supplement that? And for me, it was this fourth wave, like a combination of these fourth wave therapies.
Yeah. And what excites you the most, I guess, about the future in terms of your own work or even the field at large? What are you most excited? Maybe it's that you've witnessed something with a client. Maybe it's just the reading and the researching that you're doing yourself. What's exciting, Emma-Leigh?
I think one, I would say client interest in these areas, because the more drive that we have of clients interested, the more hopefully research that we get, and the more potentially help, I guess, that we can provide if these therapies are found to be effective over and over again. But I also think less division and greater kind of connection and coherence between our medical doctors and our medical profession and the psychology space, so that mind-body connection. I think it's one of the major things that we're missing, where people are being dismissed in medical settings or gaslit, but there is actually something happening in their body that is real, as I've experienced, very real. Like, my body went through significant medical symptoms, continued to produce them because my body was still in a fight or flight state constantly, or sympathetic state constantly. But when I was able to integrate mind-body work, then I was able to reduce that sympathetic activation and tone my vagus nerve and so on, and then see improvement in my body. So that's, I guess, being able to see the research evolve and then potentially help a greater deal of clients going through this. One of the things I was diagnosed with, for listeners that may or may not be familiar, was MCAS, or mast cell activation syndrome, and that is becoming very prevalent. And there is a large connection between MCAS and nervous system dysregulation, and some of those symptoms are what I was talking about, with sensitivity to environment, smells, overstimulation, histamine foods in general, histamine type reactions, and so on. So there is hope.
Yeah. And the intersect, I guess, in what you've shared between the body is truly doing something and there are medical symptomologies, and it goes without saying, anyone listening in, if there is something going on physically, absolutely make sure that you go and have the medical examinations, because sometimes there are genuinely things going on. It's just the intersect there between the mind and strategies that you discovered along the way helped with that autonomic nervous system and the reset, I guess, back to that parasympathetic. But I want to throw back in again, I heard you say the inner child stuff and the joy and the reconnecting to everything doesn't have to be so serious, or we don't have to be doing, like you were saying before, all the time. And I heard you kind of say that that was part of your journey as well, was really to find you again. And you were a new mum, playing, with your girls, as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry. Yeah.
No, that's amazing. I really wanted to just sort of ask, as we're kind of finishing up, Emma-Leigh, if there was someone listening in and perhaps they've kind of related to some of the physical story that you've talked about here, the medical exploration, trying to find out, or maybe they've felt medically gaslit as well, which might happen because if there's no explanation initially, it can be passed off as, well, maybe it's just psychosomatic, or maybe it's in your head, or lots of our chronic pain patients in our research over the years have said the same kind of thing. If someone's listening in and they're relating, if they want to explore further, I mean, what would your kind of thoughts be to guide their process?
Sure. I think initially just validating and affirming that the symptoms are very real and you're not making it up, and they do exist. And even mine were showing up medically in some, blood tests of inflammation, and showing up here and there on heart tests, but they weren't consistent. So they would, kind of just say, oh, well, it's not consistent. It's not really there's nothing, nothing to stress about. It's just random. But I knew, I was like, this is not me. Like, this is not normal. What's going on? And so I think initially just validating that, but then also being able to, like, for me, as I alluded to earlier, it was challenging from, I guess, from a clinical psychologist perspective, from an ego perspective, to say, how can something that is not medical help with my medical symptoms? That doesn't make sense. And so for me, it was just being really open to the fact that, okay, maybe that mind-body connection is far greater than what we realize, or than what's out there and what's taught, in my opinion. But being open to trying those vagus nerve strategies, or those nervous system regulation strategies, was something that really helped me. And even I said to myself, even if this is a placebo, I know, like, for example, the research with meditation shows that it reduces actually physically, like neuroplasticity, it physically changes structures in the brain. It reduces the gray matter in like the amygdala, which is around like emotional reactivity, and it increases gray matter in the hippocampus around emotion regulation and memory and so on. So there is research showing that these fourth wave approaches can literally change the structure of the brain and get me into a parasympathetic state, which can then accelerate healing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Amazing. And it's the one line I write if I'm ever signing a book, like on my EFT tapping or the science behind tapping, I just always write, stay open. And I think, you know,
Right.
I think to embrace anything new, whether we're coming in the therapy world or, I don't know, something else you try new out there in the world, I think staying open is what keeps those doors open, you know, where someone said, hey, have you read this or tried the brain retraining? Or because there was a part of you that was open and then things came in, and I really heard that through that story. Yeah, so stay open, everybody, just to the possibilities of, yeah, different things that could
Right.
impact and give you relief at that, yeah, autonomic nervous system level. Everything that Emma-Leigh has talked about, her links, if you want to connect, everybody, are below in the show notes. I'm going to make sure that Emma-Leigh tells me how you can find any of those online laughter classes as well, or you also said online dance classes, so we might be
Yes.
able to find some of those and make sure that they're featured there too. And of course, if you do want to follow Emma-Leigh's work and also even connect if you feel that there's synergy here and you want to talk further, details are all below, everybody, as well. Dr. Emma-Leigh Senyard, it has been an absolute pleasure. I'm so glad to have connected and heard your journey and felt validated myself a little bit that it's not just me out there kind of going, this stuff really works. To actually hear someone, you know, in person talk about your own journey with, you know, Joe's meditations and, you know, tapping, but internal family systems work, EMDR, the full works, you know, that's where it really takes on new meaning. Someone tells us that, yeah, here's where I was, here's where I am, and this is what I did in between. I just think fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing the, yeah, just having the courage and the, yeah, like being brave to share that story as well. Because I think sometimes we do worry about behind our professional kind of, you know, credentials. Oh, I maybe won't share this, or yeah, but I want to just say thank you.
No, thank you for having me. It's been a great chat.
Absolute pleasure. I hope you give us a review and a rating, everybody, and join us for another episode here on the Fourth Wave. And of course, you know, let us know what you thought of our episode. And please reach out to Dr. Emma-Leigh Senyard if you want to chat further. So thanks so much, everybody, and we'll see you again in another episode.